Okay, here we go with finding the inverse of f of x, which is what this symbol represents. The first part of it, that f to the minus 1 power, is never said f to the minus 1 power. You simply say f inverse. When you read that symbol, you say f inverse of x. Okay. Now let's start this off by, I'm going to ask you to write down the equation for a function f, and this function is the function that adds 3. So write the equation for the function f that adds 3. Pause the video right now until you come up with an answer. Okay, you've restarted the video now. You should have thought or written down f of x is the function that adds 3. That means that whatever you give it for x, it's going to add 3 to it. Okay, now I would like to write the inverse of f of x. Now what do you think the inverse would be for a function that does the inverse of adding 3? Pause again and come up with an answer. Okay, you've restarted the video. Hopefully you said, well, the function, the inverse of adding 3 is subtracting 3. So the equation of the inverse would be x minus 3. Now this is the time to stop the video and ask any questions if you don't understand. Okay, these are pretty simple. If I said h is the function that doubles a number, I hope you have already thought in your head that that would be the function 2x. So what would h inverse of x be? Pause the video now till you get an answer. Okay, you've restarted the video and hopefully you wrote or definitely thought the inverse of function h, or h inverse of x, would be either x divided by 2 or 1/2 x. They're both the same thing. Okay, now these are pretty easy ones to do. Let's say that we have a function g of x in which you triple a number and then add 7. Pause the video in a second when I tell you to. I want you to write an equation for g inverse, I almost didn't get it in there, of x. So write the equation for the inverse of 3x plus 7. And pause the video until you've come up with your answer. Okay, you have restarted the video. If you haven't stopped it yet, pause it right now. Okay. How are we going to get this? Well, we know we have to do the inverse of tripling and adding 7. And I'm moving around. I don't know if my voice is going in and out or not. Okay. Do you see in this function right here that we start with x, then we triple it, and then we would add the 7 after that? So if you're trying to do the inverse, you have to go backwards. That means you would start with x. Now the last thing we did here was add 7, so we would subtract 7 first. And then the next thing, going backwards, was the tripling, so that means we now have to take the x minus 7 and divide it by 3. And this is equal to 1/3 of x minus 7/3. Now a lot of people want to go x over 3 minus 7, but you need to see that both the 7 also gets divided by 3. So the answer for this is, well, you can write it either way. You can go x minus 7 over 3. Now for most of you that will be perfectly understandable, But I think you can understand that if it gets more complicated, it might be a little difficult to think backwards without making mistakes, or how do you write it? So we've come up with the following procedure. And I'm going to scroll up the paper here. Oh no, that's, here we're learning about how to do this. Scroll, there we go. I now can scroll up the page. Hey, that was pretty cool. Okay, I'm back on my marker now. We've developed a procedure for finding the function if it gets too complicated, and the procedure works on all of them, even the simple ones. And that is, let's say we have a function, f of x equals, well, let's use, well, it was g of x up there, so I'll make up a new one. F of x equals 5x minus 4. Okay. The first thing in this procedure that I'd like you to write is to change this and say, well, this just means y equals 5x minus 4. And now I'm going to write the equation of the inverse. Now remember that the inverse of a point xy, the inverse of xy is yx. We just exchange the position of x and y. So it makes sense here that in an equation, if I change the y to x and I change the x's to y's, that I now have an equation where x is taking the place of y and y is taking the place of x. It's exactly what we know by the inverse of something. Now, when you do this, I would like you to draw a line, because these two equations that I'm putting dots after, these two equations are not the same equation. These two equations up here are the equations for f, and what I'm working with down here now is f inverse. Okay, now after I change the equation right here on this line, I have the equation that will produce these points rather than these points. Okay, these points over here rather than these. And of course, when we have functions, we always want them written y equals. So the next steps are to solve this for y. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides to get 5y. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 5, and I get y is equal to x plus 4 over 5. Maybe now you can see why this one worked the way it worked up here at the very top of the page, okay? Now the last step is to go back and say, okay, this is the equation for f inverse, so now we change the y back to f inverse of x. Now you can either leave this expression like this, or you can make it back in that mx plus b form, 1/5 of x plus 4/5. And that's the procedure for this procedure. Is what you can do to always find the equation of the inverse of a given equation or a given function. Okay, I'm going to ask you now to go to your textbook, and on page 245, you're going to do I just realized this is going to be on the, homework page, so I really don't need to do this now, but I'm going to ask you to start working on the homework problems and to use this procedure. Now you can certainly use your common sense to guess the answer before you start, but you still need to show this entire procedure for each problem. So let's do the odds from 5 to 13. So 5 to 13 odd. Now, do as many of these. Make sure I would suggest you do like number 5 and then do something like number 9. And if you get both of those correct, then you can probably wait until later on to do the remainder of these because you understand. But make sure you do at least one that is very complicated. I would say number 11 or number 13. I know I said 9 ahead of time, but I would say either do 11 or 13 and get it right before you move on to the next video. All right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.